Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Gábor Lázár, a Hungarian music producer based in Budapest, whose new album Reflex is out now on Rasta. And unlike a previous album like Boundary Object, Reflex has a very metronomic tempo at its bass, this consistent thump, which should otherwise keep you grounded, but because everything is swirling around that central beat and the syncopations keep slipping out of your hands, it feels like being spun around in the middle of the dance floor and not really knowing which way's up. There's this gorgeous synesthesic element to Gábor's music. I mean, he uses very prominent synchronized visuals within his live sets, but even without them, just to close your eyes and listen to this stuff, the pulsations that you can feel slamming your retinas in an illusory way is quite something. I had a lovely time speaking to Gábor. We talked about 3 excellent records. I was really looking forward to what he was going to pick. He didn't disappoint. And we talked about the music scene in Budapest, historically and today, and much more else besides. This was great. So if you're enjoying the podcast, you can support it over at ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can donate monthly or one-off, any amount you please. Otherwise, you can support the show through rating and reviewing, or you can just enjoy listening to the show as well. That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, without any further delay, this is Gábor Lázár on Crucial Listening. Hello, Gábor. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you on here. So we're here to talk about 3 important albums. Before we get to those, I want to talk about your new album, Reflex, which is coming out on Rasta. So I wondered if we could start with you taking me back to the beginnings of this record. I don't know whether there's anything specific you can pull on here, but what did the beginnings of Reflex look like for you?
Actually, I think there's no beginning of an album because it's always like just one by one, and each of the album is the continuation, the previous one. So it's just like, especially for this one, because I'm using the same technological and compositional environment to create these works. So actually there isn't a new way of approaching things. Like there is some, but it's, for me, it's like just changing a little bit of perspective and then try different things out. But it's a continuation of what I doing all the time, I think.
Yeah, I've heard you talk with Boundary Object, for example, that you wanted to make an interface that would enable the creation of music that would be difficult or impossible to do with other like widely available software. I mean, was there anything from like a conceptual perspective that had that kind of feel to it when approaching Reflex, or as you say, was it just simply a continuation of where you left off?
Yeah, it's a continuation, but I use the same environment for that, for Reflex. So it's just another way to use the same environment in a different way. So, and probably there will be another album coming out later, trying different other ideas with the same environment. So I think I like these kind of limitations in a aesthetic way or technological way, and then let's see what comes out of it. And until I feel like there is another possibilities, then of course I will try it out, and then maybe it will bring new albums to life.
Because I know that you switched to making records in Logic for a bit, and then you came back for Boundary Object, right? Which was the first one upon your return to using Max again.
Yeah. Because obviously I grew up using these softwares like everyone have been using, like Reason, Cubase, Logic, all these.
Yeah.
And yeah, actually, it took a little while to kind of emotionally just keep distance from those softwares. Like I made a lot of music in those softwares using those softwares, and if you spend like 10-15 years in a given environment, then you will kind of you will be emotionally attached to it because you made a lot of works in this environment. So it took a while to realize that for me it's not interesting anymore, not because the type of music you can make in that kind of environment, but because I like to challenge myself, I think. So yeah, of course I make kind of dance music in Maximus P sometimes. So it's not about that Maximus P is for abstract music or non-linear music or whatever. It's also the way how I perform the music, because I didn't find a way to perform with Logic or anything like that.
Right.
Maybe Ableton could do that, but I wasn't into it actually, never. So because I was into Maximus P since 2010, so actually I made my own software in Maximus P, so I don't have to use any other software. So when I'm performing, these tracks just come alive, so I can play around with the sequencer and play around with. Of course, you could do this in Ableton as well, but just like I said, I never started using Ableton because I felt more interesting to make everything in the way how I want.
In terms of your live performances then, back when you were using Logic to make the records, how did you get around that problem, if you ever did, of playing live but with a setup that you felt wasn't really optimized for that environment?
Yeah, when I made like these albums like Unfold and Source and had a couple of shows, I used to export each layer of the tracks and just cut into different sections and then load it into Ableton and then combine all of these different sections in a different way.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, I used Ableton for a very short time, but it wasn't comfortable for me actually.
That's so interesting. And am I right in thinking you've just played some shows, well, in the last couple of weeks, right? Before we're talking?
Yeah, we had this label showcase in France with Olaf Bender and other people from the label.
Yeah, how did that go? And were you kind of centering your performance on Reflex material? How was it?
Yeah, actually, I'm playing this new album now. It's a new audio visual performance. It comes with real-time generated visuals, which is actually, I've been working together with a friend of mine on this visual, and he's a really good programmer. He coded everything in C++, and it's running in the background and gets messages from Maximus P and creates all these interesting visual elements. And also I combine it with lighting, stage lighting, and Maximus P audio stuff all together. So it's all these things going on in real time. So I like that.
Yeah, because I guess there's something different on a fundamental level between like that and the exporting of individual segments, which has I guess at the base level a certain rigidity to it, in that there are certain elements that you can't bend because they're what they are, right?
And the interesting thing is that the first track of the album is actually a live recording from Italy. from the stage.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't prepared to record the audio, but the technician just recorded it, and it was really good. And actually, yeah, all the tracks are real-time recording, and there's just a very little amount of editing. But the first half is a studio recording, and the second half is a live recording piece. So, and it was challenging for the audio technician. It was challenging to the mastering technician to create the same audio level for both of the pieces.
Yeah.
One was absolutely had a nice mix down in the studio, and the second half was a live situation recording, which was completely different. And it took a while to somehow merge them together without the listener recognizing that this is two different parts from two different environments.
What made you go, okay, this needs to be the first track? Because I'm just thinking it through. I can imagine a version of events where maybe you go, okay, that live recording turned out great, but I'm going to give someone a massive headache to try and get this coherent with like a set of studio material. So maybe I'm just going to like re-record it and try and get the same effect.
No. Yeah, obviously. That's an idea. You can try it, but yeah.
Yeah,
impossible. Fair. The melody actually came out in a really nice way on the stage when I was playing around with the probability and all these kinds of properties, and yeah, it was really nice how this accidentally happened in a nice way. So I was lucky that the recording was on, actually.
The record has like a very insistent sense of tempo to it compared to, say, the last one, which I've been really enjoying, and it's really discombobulating in a way because I think there's something that feels consistent and metronomic about it, but the part of your brain is telling you that, and then the other half is just scrambling to keep up with what's going on because everything else basically subverts that sense of consistency, at least to my ears. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on what has made you migrate towards something which feels, like I say, more rhythmically persistent than, say, something like Boundary Object.
Yeah, so music is for us. When I start to think about music, or just start to think about what kind of music I want to do, I always start to think about like these two axes of music, like the texture of music, or how the music is sound actually, and how the music is organized in time. So like texture and time, and like Boundary Object is more about challenging the time part of it, and maybe this album is more about it's more a linear kind of arrangement, but the texture and all the other technical side on the texture axis is more challenging maybe. But yeah, it's always like combining technology and combining some kind of aesthetic desire, and let's see how these collapse or encounter, or what kind of aesthetic technology could bring, and what I could technologically put into the aesthetic goals, So how to reach some certain goals, and what things could just randomly happen with just coming from the technological side, what these environments could bring to me and what I can put into it. So it's like always just creating an environment where these aesthetic desires and the technological environment could interact with each other.
That is lovely. Gábor, the record is really amazing. I've been blasting this everywhere, so I would definitely encourage people to do the same. I'll put links in the show notes so people can check it out. Let's go to your important records now. So, like I say, you've picked 3 important records, and one question I like to ask at this point is about how you thought about the word important when picking your list of records.
Yeah, so actually, for the reason why I choose these albums was because that these are actually from like the middle of the 2000s. And during that time, I think I was like in my late teenage years. And it was a really important era for me in Budapest, where I was living or where I grew up and still living. And at the time, I think it was a really nice era because it's a little bit. So I don't want to talk about in a negative way because, you know, these days it's completely different. But back then it was completely nice. But I don't want to say that now it's bad or wrong. And, you know, it was so good back then. You know, it's typical like how you could talk about this, but I don't want to do that. So as a late teenager, like I was really inspired about all these events and clubs and all these things was going around electronic music and all kinds of music in Budapest. And also this first album I pointed out called Nikron, the artist, and the title is Transfer Completed. It was released by this festival called Ultrahang Festival, and actually it's a compilation of recent works of the artist. So it came out in 2006, but it was made 2004, 5, and 6. And the festival itself was really interesting because it's a festival running since more than 20 years, and they were bringing a lot of international artists and supporting a lot of local artists. And it was really nice to dive into this kind of festival environment during those years. And I saw Nikron playing at that festival, and I think this album is actually it's super nice. I mean, the sound and the whole aesthetic of the music is I'd never heard anything like this.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about what makes it makes it an important record for you, because I mean I've had a really great time with this record, and there are certain aesthetic characteristics of it that are really distinctive that, you know, even now I think I struggle to associate with another artist. But what is it, do you think, about this that makes it an important record for you?
First of all, I think around that time I was really I'm still open-minded, of course, but back then I was like a late teenager. I was really about just getting a lot of inputs from different directions, and I was really paying attention for everything, like what's going on, what is this, what is that. And when I heard this, I wasn't really into this kind of technological thing or whatever, you know. I was just making music with Cubase and Logic and all these things. Said, but when for example, I saw Nikron playing live, and when I was there, I was like, "What is this? How was it made? Why does it sound like that? And how is this whole thing happening?" So it was like I was thinking, like, is there a software or anything like that? I don't know, and he's using it,
right?
Or, you know, like I was looking for my mistake. So why does it feel new to me? Meanwhile, actually, I'm into making music. I make music. So do I do wrong something?
Yeah.
And then, of course, a couple of years later, I realized that the way how he's making stuff. So he was actually programming his own effects and his own environment to make music. So yeah, it was not made with any currently available softwares. It was made by his own software. So that's the reason why actually it sounds a particular way, because he made it for himself.
I mean, the things that really stick out to me, I think the use of the low end in the pieces that I heard was so interesting, because there is a fair amount of bass on the record, but I think the way that a lot of the pieces are constructed kind of draw my listening attention more to the sort of middle and high stuff, this kind of sinewy, I don't know, like the machinations of it, rather than like a low end thump or anything. There's like less emphasis around that region, and it's a groovy record. It's kind of sexy in a way, like the way it moves is very nice, very smooth. What are the kind of aesthetic aspects of this record for you that really kind of protrude and keep it a record that's still kind of in your mind when someone asks about records that are important to you?
Well, I mean, many electronic music is about, even if it's linear or not linear, whatever, it's about many times, unfortunately, kind of rhythmical elements to create these physical effects on people, like bass and kick drum and all these things. So if you listen to this music of Nicron, there is not really a kick drum. There isn't really a kick drum. There isn't really any intention of making people feel a kick drum or whatever, but there's a texture, and the texture goes up in the spectrum, in the hearing spectrum, and gives you a lot of detail of the sound. So it is still a kind of techno music, maybe, but it's not a functional techno music, but it's more like an abstract, rhythmical electronic music, which has a lot of textural elements, and the textural quality is super detailed and interesting and sounds in a unique way. So I think it's a good approach, or that's what I'm interested in sometimes, that to create music which has a nice textural quality instead of just banging people with a lot of low frequency elements,
Yes, for sure. You mentioned that you hadn't really heard anything like this before when you initially saw Nicron performing live. Did seeing Nicron live, did it change your listening? Did you start to seek out more music like this?
I wish there would be more music like this, but yeah, at the time I was listening to a lot of radical music and like noise music, like metal and jazz and drone music and all these kinds of interesting stuff. I was really into Editions Mago and all these things. Yeah, so I was listening to everything actually, and I still listen to a lot of different kind of music. But yeah, when I heard Nicron playing, I didn't really know if there's anything like this. So yeah, I still think that after like almost 20 years since then, it's still something feels new to me, and it's still something that would feel new to actually a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best what you can say for an artist, if he or she does something and then 20 years later you say like, okay, this is still relevant and this is still good.
Is Nicron still making music? I know they're involved in projects. You mentioned that there's something going on, I think, at the moment that they're involved in, but yeah, is there music coming out as well?
Yeah, I mean, he's working on stuff, but I don't know what his plans are. But he's not active like back then. But he's working on stuff, and I wish that he's going to release something at some point.
You mentioned Ultra Hang Festival.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying you've played Ultra Hang, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. What are your memories of that? What was your experience like playing that festival?
Yeah, the guys who are running it are helpful and supportive for the local scene, and they always been trying to support new people and young people, and actually anyone who is making music. Like, they are really inclusive, and they are absolutely always, since the beginning and in the past 20 years, they were always looking for people to support. So it's absolutely something really important for the scene in Budapest.
You mentioned that you met Nicron and that he was really happy to be part of the scene in Budapest and that era. I mean, you mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, and you said about being cautious about talking about the glory days, I guess, but then thinking of the UK, for example, there's definitely nostalgia in there, but then there's also the reality of, I guess, austerity and Brexit, which has made the UK more terrible for live music, especially experimental stuff. What was it, do you think, about that era and that scene in Budapest which was special to you?
There were a lot of venues and cultural spaces. There was a lot of DIY places, and not just in Budapest, but I guess in Europe there were a lot more places like these. You know, these days we see places shut down day by day, just like, for instance, Watergate is actually closing down now in Berlin. And so in Budapest around that time there were a lot of spaces what people could use to make events, and there were a lot of events. There were a lot of different kinds of events. There were not really business motivated events, but more like just let's do something. And musicians were traveling around by train, and they were just, they've been invited to play. And then there were a lot of possible shows to choose from what to see, and there was all these kinds of drum and bass, breakcore, techno, noise music, and all kinds of stuff. So it was a kind of eclectic era in a positive way, that there was a lot of things to go to see. And I think these days there are much less spaces to go to and much less interesting stuff happening, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that is happening all around Europe, that this economical change is behind.
All right, let's go to your second important record, Gábor. Which one do you want to go for now?
I think we could go to Aerosmith.
Yes. So Aerosmith number 2. And that was released in 2002, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, maybe give me a little introduction then as to why this record is important to you.
So like I said, I was listening to a lot of music in around 2004, 5, 6, and I was, that was the time for me when I was really just introduced to the culture of electronic music, and I started to listen everything actually. And obviously I was downloading a lot of music illegally, and listening to everything. And the reason why I choose these albums is because that these albums were released around that time. So I was actually getting these inputs in real time. So I was listening to these music in real time when they came out at that time. So it was not like, okay, I just download an album from 10 years ago and then just listen to it. But it was just coming out. And I was, let's say, kind of young and a teenager kind of person. And when you get something which actually is out now, it's being released, and you just feel like, okay, this is something crazy, this is something new, this is something what inspires you. So it's you actually in the same era where the artist is. So of course he's older, but he's actually doing it and releasing it, and you get it. So I think around that time, if I think back how making music was like, and at that time I was just into these softwares like Logic and Cubase and all these things, and I was trying to just make compositions in it. But For me, Aerosmith was like super artistically advanced. It was full with a lot of humor and a lot of it was kind of minimal, and it was just if you listen to it you hear like just three sounds and a couple of effects, and the whole album is like that, and it's super interesting still. So it's another example that if I play this music now 20 plus years later, I still think that it's super inspiring, and it's still something that many people should hear.
You mentioned, I think, the humor to this album. Like the first track is great because it seems to have just the overt structure of like a club anthem, which like builds up and then drops, and it's amazing how much you can strip away and still signpost something so familiar within the dynamics of club music. This seems to be something that's kind of interesting to you, maybe. This is what I'm kind of assuming or picking up. This like idea of having references or playing with expectations within club music, but then twisting them in a way that tell me a bit about that. Like, what is it about that pulls you in, do you think?
Yeah, maybe I mentioned humor, but I think maybe it's humor or something else. You can call it whatever you want. But when I actually hear something like Aerosmith, I'm always surprised how, for instance, with this album, he can keep the feeling of club music, but still it's already not club music. It's something different. It goes out from this kind of functional club music context, and it is actually interesting how he plays around with the tolerance of people, the tolerance of the listener. So yeah, it's there's a lot of humor in it, I think. So you can expect like there's a beat, and then you can expect certain things, but then something else happens, but then you go back to the safe situation, and then goes out from the safe zone and then goes back to the safe zone. So it's always like playing around with the rules of this kind of club music. And yeah.
Yeah, I read an interview with Eric actually when he talks about, I mean, firstly the fact that the project name came from he misheard someone talking about the band Aerosmith, which is great. So again, that humor's baked into the project conception. But he said it's kind of interesting because even though it's a great artist name, he is a total control freak, in his own words, which I find really interesting. I wondered what your relationship is like with control, because based on what you've said to me and where I've heard you talk before, you're not always completely in control or fixated on being in control of your sounds. Is that the case?
Well, yeah, I like to control the aesthetic context, and I like to create certain environment for what could happen and what not could happen. But then, of course, I like to let it go, and let's see what happens when things are just doing what they have to do. Like these composition environments are like you can let it go and do whatever it wants to do, but then that doesn't make any sense. So I like to keep it in a way that it makes sense, but still it brings a lot of different possibilities to choose from. But actually, the aesthetic part is like what kind of sound you use, why do you use that kind of sound. I also would like to challenge this kind of club music and this kind of club or techno aesthetic, and just to make music what is outside of these canonized structures and outside of this canonized narrative of club music.
When you think back to discovering this album, you know, you mentioned you were downloading a lot of the time. Like when you think back to first discovering it and listening to it, like what kind of places and memories and experiences come to mind when you think about you discovering this album?
That's funny, because when I listen to this album, I always have this kind of images, you know, in my mind, that I'm, you know, 18 years old and trying to make music at my bedroom, you know, and you know, this is this kind of era when you were doing something at your bedroom, like making music, and you think like, okay, it's going to be like super interesting, and you know, and then if you listen to the music of this album, then you hear that it's there isn't so much sound synthesis in it, so it's more like drum sounds and effects.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be complicated technically or whatever.
I've heard you talk about, you know, limitations and applying limitations on yourself. How easy do you find it to do that? Because your music has a lot of space in it and, you know, enables sounds to kind of round themselves off without being interrupted by others. Is it easy for you to fight the inclination to add more, or do you find that that's a challenge for you?
You know, back then, I think, as I see, back then when this album came out, probably this kind of limitation was there anyway. So you didn't really had to limit yourself, I think, or aesthetically maybe, but in a technical way, there was a lot of limitations.
Yeah.
But these days, you can do whatever you want, and that's not really good when you start to make music. Of course, it's good. You can get a lot of different results, and that's nice, of course. But sometimes it's like you know, like if you have a lot of options to choose from, maybe it's going to be really eclectic. Yeah, for me, it's something natural to just keep it limited in on the aesthetic side.
Gábor, we've got one more important record, so if you could give me the name of it and then a little bit about why this one's important to you too.
Oh yeah, the artist is called AGF. So yeah, she's German, so I think that's the correct way of pronouncing it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I definitely wanted a female artist, of course, to be included in this list, but I wanted a female artist from that era, from this kind of, you know, middle of the 2000s. And I was started thinking about like who could be the right one. And I realized that it's at that time I didn't really know as much female artists like these days. And it's horrible, you know, that at that time we were listening music and there were a lot of male artists. And if I scroll through my archive of music collection and I see just male names, you know, it was kind of complicated to find someone. And actually I was really happy that I was thinking, and I was like, okay, there was this AGF, yeah, it's nice, let's see. And then I just realized that he is doing a lot of installations and media art related projects. So I think it's really nice to include her. And she also made an album which is called Westernization Completed. And I didn't really listen to it back then, but I listen to it now. And actually, I find it really entertaining and interesting.
The record is amazing. We've actually had one AGF album on here previously. Derek Peter picked Head/Bow, which is the album that came before this one. So this was really interesting to have this album. It's much more human, I guess, is a simplistic way to say it, but there's seems to be a lot more that I can pick up in terms of like anxiety and confusion and very human feelings on this, and a lot more kind of human reference points, I think, within this album. What is it about this record that speaks to you? What is it about the sound of this record that really connects with you?
I wouldn't say that the record is something that makes me interested. It's more the artist and what the artist is doing besides making music. So she's a media artist and she does a lot of different projects, and that's interesting, and music is just a slice of it. The interesting part for me is that how she is into different kind of ways of expressing herself.
Yeah, for sure. So there's stuff like Rec On that AGF is involved in, which is really cool. I spent a lot of time on there, where different topics, for example, migration, invasion, oppression, taken and explored through sound, through essays and different means. As you say, this kind of like holistic approach to, you know, approaching these subjects.
Yeah.
Because so often they're discussed within language, but it's really cool to hear, firstly, the multitude of voices that AGF brings in, but also the different means of communicating perspectives on those issues is really fascinating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm curious, with your own practice, obviously sound is the primary means by which you express what you want to say. You work with visuals as well. Obviously that seems to be like a really integral component of how you express what you do in a live setting. Is AGF inspiring to you because you're interested in kind of pushing your vision down different kind of routes, different kind of projects, or what is it about the kind of multidisciplinary nature of AGF's work that interests you?
I think she's coming from outside of music, probably. Mm-hmm. She's making music, but she's making a lot of other projects. And if you want to see the balance, I'm not sure if music is the main activity of her, or I'm not sure if she would consider what she is doing in music. Probably she considers what she is doing an art project, not music. It uses sounds or drum machines, and she speaks on the record, and maybe she thinks it's just a recording of a performance, what is not actually a composition of music, but it's more like a happening or more like a performance, which is more related to contemporary art. So I think she is coming from that direction, and music is just one tool besides many other tools that she's using to express herself. Many times, if someone coming from outside of music and makes music, sometimes it's more interesting than people who actually doing music since many times and for years.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well, this specific record, Westernization Completed, draws on it's listed as drawing on a wide variety of inspirations, so fashion design, painting, cinematography, and electronic correspondence. So that's cool as well, that it's working with this transposition of mediums where there's absolutely no reason why fashion can't be transposed into the world of sound, and you can't pull on the techniques or different sensations that you derive from that medium into music and sound as well, which is really cool. I should definitely in fact draw people's attention to, female pressure has been one, it feels pertinent to mention here as well. You mentioned back then sort of the perception that there were no women within electronic music. Around that time, Female Pressure has done pretty phenomenal work in highlighting, say, the disparity and gender representation on festival lineups on record labels as well. So, yeah, it's definitely worth checking out.
Eyes wet. full of fascination. Could be somewhere around. It could be. It could be. If you need.
Okay, Gábor, I have one more question for you, and it's about your music listening, like how you listen to music and how you bring music into your life. In fact, I'll break this question up a bit. So, are there formats that you particularly like?
I'm not sure, but these days I think, of course, having a vinyl release is nice, but actually there's a lot of compromise around how the music is compressed, and you need to compress the music a lot to fit the technical requirements of the vinyl. So if you listen to, especially my music, sometimes I have to cut a lot of details to fit the vinyl. I think CD, for that reason, CD is still a very good format because you can keep those details. And also, I think the economy currently doesn't really allow us to keep the vinyl kind of format, and I'm not sure if it makes sense on long term. So I would be really happy if we would say like there's a lot of CDs and you can buy it cheaper, we can ship it cheaper, so everyone could get the music what he or she wants to put into a collection, I'm not sure if vinyl is something that we should. It's really nice, and it's a nice format. It has a nice size also, dimensions, and you can put the artwork on and stuff like that. It's really nice, but the music what you put on, technically there's a lot of compromise.
Yeah, for sure. I think about this a lot, when mastering, how you can do a master of an album where you are thinking purely in terms of what is best for the sound.
Yeah. And also you lose a lot of dynamic range, and I really don't like the process when the mastering is happening, because it's just about the question, what do you want to lose from your
Yeah.
you want to lose this or you want to lose that? And it's a bad question. I don't want to lose anything.
Final question then, Gábor. Where do you tend to buy music? Like, do you buy it online, record stores? In fact, what are the record stores like in Budapest?
There's a couple of record stores. They are the same since in the past 20 years.
Nice.
I keep going to record stores, especially because I know these people who are running the stores, and it's nice to just say hi and buy a record.
Cool. Gábor, this has been really nice. Thank you so much. Like I say, I love the new record. It was really cool to get some insight into the workings behind Reflex, and your 3 picks were great as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. And to everyone listening, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.